After sprint planning, you can start working on the project. And by you, I mean the developers, because you're the product owner. Okay, we'll get back to what you do. But for the developers, while they are working on the product, they need to have daily meetings. That's one of the things in Scrum. And in fact, we have it on all agile systems. It's called the daily stand-up. In Scrum, it is called the daily Scrum. And it's a 15-minute time-boxed meeting where the developers get together and talk about the project. Traditionally, we say that each person has to answer 3 questions. What I've done since yesterday, what I'm going to do until tomorrow, and what problems I may have. Recently, the Scrum org has changed it, and now they say that it's one of the ways you can do it. If you want, you can handle your daily scrums in other ways. But anyway, the point is that we do it to synchronize the developers. The developers do it to synchronize themselves. All right. So that's one of the things. And other than that, the developers are expected to evaluate their performance during the sprint. It's not part of daily Scrum anymore. It's part of the daily things that they do. Maybe they will do it after the daily Scrum. So what they usually do is that they create a burn down chart. A burn down chart shows the amount of remaining work across time. And that's one of the things that we'll get back to and talk about more. It's a simple diagram that shows your progress. So they will update that diagram, and it's usually in the same board where they have their sprint backlog. And they can even use that board to add other information such as the sprint goal. You remember we have 2 outputs for the sprint planning. One of them is the sprint goal and the other is the sprint backlog. Okay, so we are working, the developers are working, and then every once in a while they are done with one of the items. It's done. What should they do? What do you think? When they are done, they will call you. They will call the product owner, and you will go there and check the item with them. It's just a double check to make sure that it's really done. Because we are really sensitive about that in Scrum. When we say that something is done, when we show something to the customer, we really want it to be done, because otherwise it won't be able to generate feedback. So when is something done? For example, let's think of user acceptance testing. When would you do that? Would you do it now, in the middle of the sprint? Would you do it at the end of the sprint? Or would you do it every few sprints? What do you think should be done? User acceptance testing will be done as soon as you're almost done with the items. And in fact, you won't put the item in the done column unless you have done the user acceptance testing. Because if you don't do that, then you're not really sure about the item. You will have a big pool of items that you call done, but after a while when you do the user acceptance testing, you will see that many of them are not accepted. So you have to work on them again, and it won't be organized. You won't know what's happening in the project, and also it will create problems for your feedback loops. That's why we will do the user acceptance testing as soon as possible. And at that point, when they call you, the product owner, to come and check the item with them, the user acceptance testing is already done. What about other types of tests? What about documentation? For example, do you need to have some type of reference manual for the features? There are lots of things here. And therefore, it's a good idea to have a list of everything that we expect to do for each item before we call that item done, isn't it? Then when you go there and you talk to the developers, you know what done means for both of you, and you're thinking about the same thing when you're talking about done. Or when you show something to the customer will also have the same understanding as you have about the concept of done. So we create a list. And since we are doing that, it's a good idea to have a name for that. Do you know the name by any chance? It is called the definition of done. So the definition of done is like a checklist. Think of it as a checklist that applies to every item that we have in the sprint backlog and the product backlog. Who do you think should compose the definition of done? That's a good question. And you may answer incorrectly. It is done by the developers because they are the people who know best about the way features work. Still, you may say that the product owner also should have a say on that. For example, when it comes to the reference manual and things like that are not really technical, but still in the Scrum, it's a responsibility of the developers to create the definition of done. Okay, now let's say you're still in the middle of the sprint and you're done with all the items. What would you do next? Okay, first, you remember that the sprints are time boxed and they have a they have a fixed duration. Some time boxes, for example, sprint planning and every other time box that we have here, they have a maximum duration. So if your sprint planning is time boxed for 8 hours and you're done in 6 hours, you will just stop the sprint planning meeting and you will go on to the next thing. That's fine. But for the sprints, to make sure that everything is in order, we will have fixed duration time boxes. So when you're done with everything, you don't have the option to stop the sprint and start the next one. You have two options here. One of them is to spend your time doing other things. Maybe you want to research something that may be useful for the future sprints. Maybe you want to go through the code that you've already written and is working and improve that code. You know what that is called? That's called refactoring. We'll get back to that, don't worry. So you may want to spend your time on things like that. You may want to take a few days off and have fun. You're self-organized. I know that. But the other option that you have is to bring the next item from the product backlog to the sprint backlog and start working on that. That's also possible. Now, on the other hand, let's say we are at the end of the sprint. This is important. We are at the end of the sprint, we don't have more time, and we know that the sprints are time boxed, but we are not done with one of the items. What would you do with that item? Okay, I don't know about you, but what most people say is that we will send it to the next sprint backlog. That's not the perfect answer. Perfect answer is to send it back to the product backlog. We will send it back here. We will refine the backlog again. We will order the backlog and then we will create the next sprint backlog the normal way. You know why? Because, for example, you may have started working on the feature and it was on the top of the product backlog because you, as a product owner, thought that it's a very simple feature. It takes only a few hours to develop and the return on that investment is justifiable. That's why it was on the top of your product backlog. But when people started working on that, they realized that, oh, it will take weeks to create that feature. In that case, it won't have such a high priority for you and won't have such a high value for the product anymore. So when you put it back into the product backlog, you will refine the information, which includes your estimate for the size of the item. And when you order it again, it will probably go down in the product backlog and it may not go to the next sprint backlog. That's why we don't send it there automatically. We will send it back to the product backlog. All right, so what about the items that are finished? We will send them, we will put them, package them in something we call the increment. That's the next increment of our software that we will show to the customer. And that's going to be our topic for the next lesson.